Man, it is episode 85 of the Three Guys Talking Ball podcast. It is the post 4th of July edition. We're recording this a week early because I'm going on vacation and got a contact game never stops. So we bring on a former voice of the Bison. He is a UND alum. We're not going to hold that against him. He works for Midco for the Fighting Hawks right now. Yeah, having a little bit of some technical issues before joining us, which I don't know what a podcast or any type of media space would be without some technological issues. I'm sure this is Brian's first time you've ever had any technical issues working, however many games you've worked or any shows you've done.
Oh yeah, I've never had that happen before. It's honestly, I wouldn't even know what to do if it didn't happen, because you almost just have to anticipate something's going to go wrong,
Yeah.
And you're doing stuff that's live, especially like stuff doesn't come up, something breaks down, power sources go off, weather. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that can cause issues. So you just have to anticipate it.
Do you have any that stick out in your mind specifically that you can that I can't believe that happened and somehow we survived?
The game at Youngstown State in 2014, 2015, or was it 2016? Easton was the starting quarterback. And
was that the Bo Pelini year?
That was the Bo Pelini year. That was
so it would have been 15, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. 15. I knew it was somewhere around there, but Bo Pelini, that was the game he melted down. But the technical errors that we had before that game, I am stunned we got that game on the air. Because we didn't know where we were going to call the game from until an hour before the game. They put us on top of the roof of the press box, which if you've seen Stambaugh Stadium, we had a eagle's eye view from 2,000 feet, man. We were up there. So
oh my God.
That was one where there was and it was 38 degrees. It was windy. I'm like, we're going to blow off the top of this place. It was that wild. It was that scary. It really was. And I actually read a story some years later that a guy did fall off the roof of the press box one time because of high winds and died when they were doing something up there. So that even scared me more.
Was Brian Kelly there?
No, he was not. Oh, that was bad. So,
yeah.
When you go on the road to some of these places, you don't know what's going to happen. They are not prepared for what you do. Their broadcasts are different. So you just have to expect the unexpected.
Yeah, for sure. That I can about imagine, especially in the nice, always predictable weather the Midwest has. You can never always a surprise. Now you're working for UND for Midco. Is that correct?
That's right. Well, I'm working for Midco, broadcasting UND.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I don't work for UND specifically. I do not. It's the one sport I don't do. Football, basketball are kind of my jam.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, because I just saw they picked up a recruit from Four Winds today. I didn't even know he played football, but he's extremely athletic. Dang is his name.
Yep.
Dang. How is UND looking for football this year?
I think they'll be okay. They return a lot on the offensive side. Pretty much everybody. They lose one of their top receivers and then their top tight end, but all 5 offensive linemen are back. They did lose a really good running back in Tyler Hoosman, who signed a free agent deal with the Chargers, and I think he brought a lot of maturity to that running back room. So they're going to have to find a way to replace that production. I think that'll be tough. But I think their skill guys are good. We have a quarterback that's started over 30 games. That always helps. So I think they feel really good about that side of the ball. The biggest question mark is on defense. There's some new pieces on the defensive line, linebacker, safety. How are the safeties going to work out? That's the side of the ball that UND struggled with the most last year. They gave up over 50% on third down defensively. It was one of the 10 worst in the nation. You can't play football that way and win.
It's hard to do.
It is, and they still went 7-4 despite that. So I think if you look at that, you think, okay, if they can improve the defense and keep the offense production where it is, they can be pretty good, I think.
Yeah, and they were probably based off everything that I've read, they were screwed out of a home playoff game. They also have a new coordinator. I did not realize that Schuster is back again.
Yeah, he
for
is.
for another year. It seems like he's been there for 8 years.
Yeah, and honestly, he actually has another year on that if he wants it. He doesn't only have next year, but he does have 2024 with the COVID year if he still chooses to use that. So he could be around for a while, and I don't know if he'll do that, if he'll exercise that year or not, but that would give you a nice luxury for Danny Freund if you can get your signal caller to stay again.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like that with that much experience, and because I believe they have in NDSU lore a big name, the younger Feeney as the backup. I'm guessing he's probably planning the next year to take over as the starter.
I would think so. And that was still kind of up for debate, that backup job, even in the spring. But I think Trey Feeney did win the job. And coming into fall camp, he's the guy. He's the backup quarterback. Quincy Vaughn, who was kind of their backup quarterback and short yardage quarterback for sneaks and stuff, has actually been moved over to tight end. And that is the position he is practicing at most. He still takes some reps at quarterback. I think there'll still be a package for him at quarterback, but I think you're going to see him mostly line up at tight end now.
Yeah, absolutely. So you went to school at UND, and when you were there, I want to say it was around the time when UND kind of had a stranglehold on the UND NDSU rivalry. What do you remember the most about those games?
Well, in my first year or two, I got there in 97, 98. It was still pretty even, but Bob Babich had kind of just gotten there, and things were still pretty good for NDSU. They still went to the playoffs. They were still a team that was competing, and UND wasn't in the postseason. And then right around 99, 2000, 2001, that's where the trajectory changed. Dale Lennon, I think, got things really rolling a little bit. I think the recruiting improved. They were able to out recruit NDSU and Bob Babich at the time for some guys. There were some recruits that NDSU brought in that just did not work out. And I think it was just a perfect storm of things that happened. And that's when UND went on that postseason run in 2001 and won the national championship in D2. And then they played for the final time as D2 competitors in 2002. And that was the famous 4th and 1 call where NDSU didn't get it. And UND won the last nickel trophy game ever back in 2002. And then they didn't play again after that until, when they finally met here 4 or 5 years ago. Well, maybe it's 5 or 6 years ago now. When they met at the Fargo Dome, and they finally got a non-conference.
Is that when we were still in school, Dylan? I want to say that.
Yeah, that was like 8. That was in 2015. That was. Was
it 15?
I think that would have been like 8 years ago now.
Okay.
That's crazy to think.
Yeah, I mean that's just how fast it goes too, because they played a couple of games, and then when UND got in the Valley, that's when they finally kind of got it. It's been a little more. It's getting a little bit more consistent now, at least, and I don't know if it'll stay that way with NDSU's potential plans in the future. But this will be the 3rd or 4th time they've played as conference opponents, so we'll see how it goes. And it's in Grand Forks for the 2nd time. I know fans have been waiting a long time to get the Bison back at home.
Yeah, well, and watching that game 2 years ago you could hear the Alaris Center just rattling. And there were a lot of people. I remember Jeff Kolpak tweeting out how the NDSU in the FCS era has not played in a crowd this rowdy or played with this level of noise at the FCS level. And there were people very up for. I don't know why NDSU fans can get that way, where they get very sensitive about that type of thing. Where it was like, no, that stadium was loud. I mean, the Alaris Center is kind of a chicken coop looking like thing, but I mean it's all aluminum and it just rattles off the top, and you could tell that rivalry, the passion, similar to when NDSU and UND played the first time in the Fargo Dome. I remember there being a certain type of buzz in the Fargo Dome which you didn't get a lot of, because that was kind of on that downward trajectory where fans were like, oh, all we got to do is show up.
Yeah, I remember that too. I remember I go back to that game, and I think it was 36-7. It still wasn't very competitive. And really, the only game that hasn't been competitive in the D1 era was the game in Grand Forks that NDSU was able to seal in the 4th quarter with a long drive when UND I think went for it on a fake punt and from their own 20-yard line or something like that in the 3rd quarter, and that's kind of where the tide turned, so to speak. So, yeah, I mean, that place does rattle. It can get really loud in there. And even the game last year against South Dakota State, there was over 10,000 present for that game. And I know that's not the 19,000 that, we're used to seeing at the Fargo Dome when it gets really loud, but when you put 10,000 in the Alaris, it can be a pretty good atmosphere and a lot of fun to be a part of that. And when UND was winning that game at halftime, I think there was, a lot of buzz, and then the Jackrabbits just buzzed out of them in the second half. But it can be a festive atmosphere, and I know it will be when the Bison come up on October 14th. Oh man, I kind of lived across the street from there my second year, and I really actually really enjoyed it in there. It was a very old school feel, and if you put fans in there when it's cold outside, when you get in October, November, it could be a really unique place and a tough place to play in the old turf. And you guys remember what the old AstroTurf used to look like at the Dome? It was just this carpet essentially, and that's what it was at Memorial Stadium. It was just this like playing on concrete with a thin layer of carpet on top of it. And I saw some pretty nasty injuries in my time there, but it was fun in its own right. But at the same time, when it did we lose him?
Keep going. He'll come back.
Okay.
He'll figure it out. Yeah, keep going.
But I think when everything moved to the Alaris Center, the one thing that changed, and I think maybe changed a little bit for the worse, was the games being moved off campus. And when the games are moved off campus, I just think it's tougher to get your student section engaged. It's a process to go over there. Who's going to drive, right? If we want to have a good time, we got to be careful with that. It's a lot easier just to walk across campus and stumble home when you're done. If you want to go to the game and have a good time at halftime and all that sort of stuff. So I do think that part of it changed a little bit. The student section was still pretty good because UND was really good when they went to the Alaris Center kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that was a fun time to be there for a part of that. But I think that's the challenge that I think UND has, is trying to get, students to consistently show up when you're not playing games on campus.
How much do you think them not making the jump to FCS affected them and set the program back?
A lot.
Back when they went up, when NDSU went and UND didn't, because right away that's who NDSU wanted to make the jump with, was UND. And UND, and I don't, you probably know this more than I do, but what was the reasons why UND didn't want to make the jump, and what's that impact that if they're still facing it today?
That's a great question. And that's something I think probably isn't talked about quite enough. And I remember when I was a student, I went and interviewed Roger Thomas about this very thing, who was the athletic director at UND at the time, was with the football coach previously to that. And Roger just had all sorts of hesitations about what it was going to take financially, about you have to have a president, quite frankly, that wants to make that move. And Joe Chapman at the time was very aggressive. I don't even know if Gene Taylor at the time was totally sold on the move. They brought in and did a Division I study with a bunch of athletic directors at NDSU that quite frankly had been fired in other places. So, I mean, you really want to trust those guys to tell you what you should be doing with your athletic department? That would make me a little concerned. And I think that was Roger Thomas's point. It's like, well, these consultants are guys that were ADs that aren't ADs anymore. And at that time, Charles Kupchella did not see the value of going Division I for football, because UND was doing a really good job at Division II, and that time was having a lot of success. And when Joe Chapman said, we're going to fund this, the school is going to throw millions of dollars to make it happen, we're going to fully fund football right away because we've been told that's the way we need to do it. And that was really smart, because Northern Colorado did it at a very similar time. They did not fully fund football right away. They did it on a gradual increase of 4 scholarships here, 8 scholarships there, and it took them 5 or 6 years to get up to fully funded. And that was a program that was a national contender every year in D2. I mean, that was one of the main rivals for NDSU and UND in the late 90s, early 2000s. If you look back at that program has never recovered from taking that step, from not just fully funding football right away and going all in. And I think if you look at where North Dakota State is and where they've been, where South Dakota State is and where they've been, look where UND and USD are. You can't argue the fact that them not moving up when those two did set those programs back at least a decade. because right now, look at recruiting. North Dakota State and South Dakota State are cleaning up. They're more established. They have larger budgets. They have larger recruiting budgets. They've been able to build it up over time. And UND and USD have been in catch-up mode from facility standpoints, from financial budgeting and recruiting budgets. So that's the challenge, is they're trying to play catch-up. And those teams have had some success. I mean, since moving to D1, South Dakota beat the Gophers. UND beat Wyoming. They all have FBS wins. They've been in the FCS playoffs each a couple of different times. UND, I think, has been there 4 of the last 5 years. They're making progress, but when you compare it to what South Dakota State and North Dakota State have done, it doesn't register up here. I think if you put UND in another region, another conference, not in this area, I think people say, hey, that's a pretty successful Division I FCS program. But when you compare everything to what the two big guys are right now with the Jackson Bison, who aren't only number 1 and number 2 in the Missouri Valley, but number 1 and number 2 in the country. And they're going to be number 1 and number 2 in the country in the preseason this year. And I think there's a huge drop off to 3, to be quite honest with you guys. So, I mean, that's a good point, a good question that needs to be brought up. Hindsight, looking back at it now, Gene Taylor wasn't sure if this move was going to go. He wasn't even sure if he was going to have a job 5 years later, if this was going to bomb and blow up in our face. Hiring Craig Bohl, how is that going to work? We don't know. We could get our teeth kicked in for 15 years and be 6-6 in a doormat every year. But that's not what happened. So now everybody looks at it and says it was a really great move for the Jackson Bison to make that move together and go through the struggles and go through some of those tough times when you could not play in the playoffs and you were still getting beat by some teams. But if you fast forward now, everybody will say, boy, that was the right move, and UND and USD should have gone to.
Yeah. How much do you think the obsession for hockey, and then how much do you think, or if it affects it at all, or how much do you also think the going, instead of getting the invite right away to the Valley, because I believe they weren't invited because there was still some issues with the Fighting Sioux nickname as well. How much do you think that played an impact as far as also falling behind?
I think it definitely plays a factor. And you can't deny the fact that the number 1 sport at the University of North Dakota is hockey. And it's been that way for decades. And that program's had a lot of success. It's a revenue generator. They draw 11,000 people a game. I mean, that's hockey country. That's where their tradition is. There is some football tradition, but it's different when your number 1 sport at one university is football, and at another university, the number 2 sport is football. And that's kind of where they're at with UND. Now, I think UND, and I'll give credit to Bill Chaves and Bubba, they've done a nice job of continuing to build and fundraise. There's new facilities going in for football. They're doing a nice job with their indoor facility. It is a nice facility. A new weight room is going in there. Memorial Village is with new offices and all this. I mean, it's going to be really nice when it's done. It is going to be really well done. But it is different, I think, for schools when you have to go somewhere where hockey rules. I mean, go to the University of Denver, go to Omaha. I was talking to somebody about this. If you look at the 3 hockey schools, even in the Summit League, and I know we're getting off the path a little bit with football, but if you go look back at Summit League men's basketball, the 3 hockey schools finish 8th, 9th, and 10th in men's basketball. I don't think that is. I don't think that's just a wow. That's surprising. It's hard because football and basketball, right? It's football and basketball. A lot of the schools right now in the Dakotas, that's how it kind of runs and operates. That's how it is, at least here. At UND, it is hockey, football, then basketball. So you have to find a way to make all that work. Plus, basketball is in a facility and plays in a nice facility. I think that is getting some renovations done this summer. But again, that is not a facility that's owned by the university. That's owned by the Ralph Engelstad Arena, which is a whole separate entity that controls the Ralph and the Betty. That is not controlled by the university. So that creates other issues that maybe people don't understand, is when you don't get a cut of all your ticket sales, or a smaller cut maybe than some of your peers, it hurts you across the board. And hockey, quite frankly, is run through the REA. It's really not run much through the athletic department. And I think it's its own separate entity when they operate that way. And it has to operate that way because that's the business model for how it works. But I think those are some of the challenges at the University of North Dakota. I think they're overcoming some of that. And I think they're investing way more into those other sports and facilities than they certainly were 5 years ago when it comes to recruiting budget, coaches' salaries, and all that stuff. but they still have some catching up to do in that area for sure.
Yeah. I'll let you guys go because I had some technical. Yeah. Speaking of technical issues, I spoke it into existence. That's why I had to dip out there for a second. So I didn't get to hear if you guys asked any questions, but I'll let you guys go ahead.
When do you think NDSU jumps up? Because what's the point of building this $40 million practice facility when you're already the best? Like, it's got to be soon, right?
Yeah. 54 million.
54. There you go. It's even more.
Yeah, even more. That even goes beyond their wildest expectations, and they're still building it. I was at a Red Hawks game the other night.
Just
I'm like,
crazy.
Oh my God, they're not even done with it yet.
It's been
got a lot of work. Yeah, it's been forever. But I would be surprised. This is just Brian talking here. I would be surprised if they don't at least receive a call in the next year or two.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's the call they want, but I would be stunned in the next year or two that there's not going to be enough movement to the point where somebody's going to make them an offer. I think ideally for North Dakota State, the best case scenario for them would be to get a football only invite to one of these leagues. I think primarily Mountain West. I still think that's the best fit. I know some people say AAC, maybe. Some people would even say, even if the Conference USA calls and it's a football only invite and you're NDSU, I think you even have to listen.
You have to at least, 100%.
You have to listen. It's not a great football league, but you have to listen to that one if it's football only. Because financially, if you just move football, it's probably like 5, 6, 7 million you'd have to add to your budget because you got to increase coaches' salaries, scholarship numbers go up by 22, and then all the support staff. That's about what it would probably somewhere in that range cost. If you move all your sports up to a different league, now you're talking like 16 to 18 to 20 million a year more. That's a significant difference. So I do think if you're NDSU, the best case scenario is move football to the P5 level, preferably the Mountain West, keep all your other sports in the Summit League and operate that way and see how it goes. That would be my guess would be the best case scenario for them just to make it work financially.
Yeah. Well, and even like if you look at like even as far as like from logistically speaking, the Mountain West, it's a really good league, but it almost, I think, would be somewhat similar to what UND it was in the Big Sky because there's still most of the time 3 time zones or 2 time zones ahead of where most of those teams are, where opposed to like the American or the Conference USA, they're in more of an area where there's a little bit more of a recruiting, a little bit more regionality there too. But even I think at the same time, I'm with you where if you get a call from any 3 of those leagues, Mountain West as well, you have to take it. And I know Matt Larson, I'm pretty sure he's been on record saying that, they've been prepared. They're just kind of waiting on a call. And if they get the right one, I think you have to because, and like you said, Brian, it's SDSU and NDSU 1 and 2. And then after that, with teams like James Madison leaving, Sam Houston State leaving, there is a huge drop off. Just look at the conference or the FCS playoffs where Montana State was. A lot of people thought they could upset South Dakota State because of last year, but South Dakota State blew them out of blew them out of the building, and they play I think week 3, and I think it's going to happen again.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree with you, and I know some of the concerns maybe about the Mountain West, about how you're traveling west and you're dealing with Pacific time zone and Mountain time zone, and you're the only kind of outlier in the Central time zone. But I look at it more of a branding piece. Look at the institutions that are part of that league, to me, resemble way more what North Dakota State is than some of those other leagues. Wyoming, Colorado State. That to me, that resonates with fans. Boise State. I think when those schools come to Fargo, that's a big deal. I think that would be, even if they're playing at 9 o'clock at night, which I know that could very well be with their TV deal with CBS Sports and everything else. I mean, yeah, there's going to be some late kickoffs, and it's not great, from that standpoint. That being said, I think compared to who you're competing against, I think that would resonate most with the fan base compared to some of the other leagues. To me, it would be hard, even though being in the AAC would be good from a more of a centrally time zone area, East time zone, like it makes more sense. I still think the schools in the Mountain West, to me, are more recognizable, and I think there is a stronger brand there, personally. Nationally.
Yeah, I would. Well, I mean, I would love to see a Craig Bowl reunion at the Fargo Dome. I would love to see Boise State come where you actually get to go out to Boise this year. And I think it also opens up the door for more FBS Power 5 games, which most teams seem to be running away from and not wanting to schedule in DSU.
Yeah, and that's the other problem, right? Is trying to schedule even Power Fives are very, very difficult. And the other part of that, when scheduling, it's like, well, no one wants to schedule them. Even when they do want to schedule North Dakota State, and we've seen this now with SDSU and UND, they're really getting pretty chintzy in paying out the FCS schools. They are paying G5 schools double what they're paying FCS schools for non-conference games. And, should NDSU really take a $350,000 payday from Kansas State when Kansas State is bringing in Colorado State for $1.1 million? I mean, that's the difference. In South Dakota State, they're taking those paydays. I know, like UND, they got $600,000 from Nebraska. I think they're getting $600,000 from Boise. They were supposed to actually go to Washington. People maybe don't know this, but this game was supposed to be a game at Washington again this year, and then somehow they traded contracts. Washington got a different game that year that they really wanted to take, and they sold the contract somehow to Boise, and that's why that UND is going to Boise instead this year. But yeah, FCS opponents are getting about half of what G5 opponents are getting in non-conference games against.
Is that just because the group of five looks that much better than an FCS opponent, or like what's the reasoning behind that?
I think it looks better in terms of when you're talking about like conference points when it comes to the BCS, and you're coming to rankings and all that sort of stuff.
It just looks better.
Typically, the G5 leagues, they just have a better power ranking than the FCS schools do. Like it looks better, in terms of your power ranking of your conference when you're trying to get maybe 2 bids to the BCS or get better bowls or whatever the case may be. That's the biggest reason. The second one is they know they have the FCS schools over the barrel. The FCS schools need the money. Especially some of these schools, they really need the money. There's some schools that are playing 2 or 3 FBS opponents a year just because they have to do it to keep their athletic department solvent. So they have to take whatever schools are willing to offer them and go get their teeth kicked in week after week after week with 22 less scholarships, bloodied and bruised, and get beat by 5 touchdowns just to help out all the other sports on campus. And that's a reality of a lot of FCS schools. NDSU is not one of those programs that needs to take a $400,000 payday. They can pay someone $200,000 to come to the Dome and almost come out on the same, or go to US Bank Stadium and play like they are this year and get a cut of concessions and a cut of ticket sales and come out with, people don't realize the Target Field game, NDSU made almost $1 million on that game. People don't talk about that.
We contributed to that one too.
Yes. When you talk about concession sales and all, they got a cut of a lot of different things. They got close to $1 million. Now, so for them, it made more sense to play Butler at Target Field than it did to go play Oklahoma for half that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's all that factors into it too, is it's got to make sense for the school financially to do it.
Well, and I don't know if you remember, but Deion Sanders was a big proponent of not playing FBS teams because at the end of the day, on paper that amount looks good, but when you add in travel costs, food, buses, everything else, there's sometimes where you end up taking a loss or you barely break even.
Yeah.
Which is a wild thing to think about, but that's the nature of it. It's, and the more I think about it, you look at I'm not sure how for athletic departments, you essentially have to buy out a plane, tickets aren't cheap. It's getting chartered. It's essentially a private jet would be my guess, which is a very large private jet at that. So you're already paying more on top of that. It's some of these schools, it's just not worth it.
Yeah. I don't think people necessarily realize that too, that 10 years ago, and everybody pretty much charters unless it's drivable within 300 miles. Everybody football charters. We chartered everywhere last year. We would charter in Northern Iowa, and that is technically drivable maybe, but you still charter, right? That's just what we do at the D1 level. What people don't realize is that 10 years ago, a charter costs around $60,000 to $65,000 for every charter on average. It's with inflation, airplanes, fuel, it's now well over $100,000 a charter that you have to pay. So, teams are paying $40,000 to $50,000 more just for travel alone for charters than they were 10 years ago. So, I mean, the costs continue to rise on all of that stuff. Hotel prices, food costs. I mean, all that stuff factors in, and athletic departments are just trying to keep up. And I think that's the challenge everybody is facing, is what makes sense best for us. And that's why a lot of even the FCS schools, do we want to move FBS? Boy, that sure sounds great, but we can bus to pretty much all of our schools and not need charter buses, not need charter planes. That's a lot easier than joining this league and having to take 4 charter flights every year, because that's going to cost us an extra $500,000 or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot that has to go into that too.
Yeah, Grant, you've been pretty quiet. I haven't heard it. So what? Let's hear that beautiful voice.
So we had the Youngstown story where you were out 37 degrees on top of the press box. On a lighter note, in the Valley, what was the away stadium that you enjoyed going to the most? Maybe not just because of the stadium, but the city, the food, the opposing team's fans, just the atmosphere and the all-around experience from the best away stadium in the Valley.
Oh, that's a good question. In terms of the best atmosphere, it was pretty cool at Dana J. Dykehouse in Brookings. It is. I mean, they pack it. NDSU comes down. That's a fun game outside in the elements. I mean, the 4th and 1 by Cofield, I'll never forget that. That was one of my favorite moments ever in terms of calling a game, just because it was just crazy how it all transformed and unfolded. But in terms of the places that we've had a chance to go and do games from, one of the more unique places I really enjoyed going to was Delaware. We had a chance to televise a game at Delaware, Trey's freshman year, when he was his first year starter. And that was just unique to go to a different part of the country and broadcast a game in a place, like, wow, I've never been to the East Coast to do a game before. And just to see how people are and how the fans are and how their tailgating scene is, it was unique and fun to just kind of see that. But I mean, honestly, guys, nothing for me, I don't think, in terms of a venue and getting a chance to broadcast a game will ever top the game at Target Field. It was 37,000 people in a Major League Baseball stadium. I'm in the visitors' baseball broadcast booth, calling a football game. I mean, it was so unique and so different, and had never been done by anybody before. And for us to come in, it was a lot of unknowns even for us about camera positions and where we were going to be and how this was going to look and all this stuff, right? I mean, it was not created to televise football. So that was to me always going to be one of probably be my favorite one, just because of how fun and unique that situation was. But at the same time, I had a chance to do a basketball game when NDSU played down there against Drake at US Bank Stadium, when they kind of did that as a trial for the Final Four.
That was really cool. Mm-hmm. We were there.
And that was fun. Yeah. Was fun. I've had a chance to do a basketball game at a football stadium and a football game at a baseball stadium, so I really can't complain.
How was Kinnick?
Kinnick was awesome.
Yeah.
I kind of went pseudo fan. Like I took my mom and dad, and my mom grew up in Iowa. She's a huge Hawkeyes fan. So I got her tickets to that game, and she had never been to an Iowa game before. Huge Iowa fan.
Okay.
And her whole life, she had never been to a game. And I took her down, and she got in there, and they were in the NDSU section. That's how I got the tickets. And so she's sitting there, and she just was like emotional, and she couldn't believe she was there for the first time and how exciting it was. And then they lost, and I felt so bad for her. Her first experience going to an Iowa game as a lifelong fan was losing to NDSU at Kinnick. So she sat there, and we just kept apologizing, like, I'm sorry, because everybody's going crazy around us. And she's just sitting there in disbelief. So, I mean, that was a really fun stadium. I mean, the game at K-State, I didn't broadcast that game or the game at K-State, but even the game at K-State was so unique because it was like 107 degrees at kickoff. Yeah. It was just absurdly hot. And everybody was cramping up, and everybody's like, can NDSU really play with these guys? And that was the 2013 team, who I will still claim is the best NDSU team ever. I know everybody's going to has their opinions on that, but the 2013 team was really special in terms of how they were built. And that to me was kind of a special one, because that was the first win over somebody that wasn't Minnesota that was on national television on a Friday night on FS1. And I think that really, really got the nation's attention for NDSU. And then you started seeing game day come the following years and all that sort of thing. It really was just kind of a fun, that to me was kind of a unique one, just because that one I really felt like got people's attention.
Well, it wasn't Kansas State. I know they lost Colin Klein, but they were the Big 12 champs the year before.
Correct.
Yeah, so they were.
On paper, that's a hell of a win.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah, and Bill Snyder.
Similar to the Iowa win. You go down late, you score, you're like.
Yeah, man.
It was
the last possession of the game, right?
Yeah, it was
Oh,
both your last possession.
Yep.
Yeah, they were both at the very end.
Yeah. Iowa was my first year at Iowa off of NDSU, graduate from NDSU, so I was working for their athletic department.
Okay.
I don't think anyone talked to me and Gene outside of just us two the week after. They just hated us.
Yeah. Dude, I can see it. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember when they scheduled the game and Gary Barta scheduled the game, and Gene Taylor was telling me a story that he was walking by and Ferentz called him into his office and they were watching an NDSU playoff game. And they're like, oh, they were watching the game. Like, why did we schedule these guys when they were watching the game? And he goes, oh, boy, I'm glad that guy's gone. And Gene's like, well, actually, he's only a sophomore. And then Bruce Anderson ran a kickoff return back. I think it was against Northern Iowa or somebody. And they're like, oh, yeah, boy, I hope that guy's gone. Well, actually, he's just a freshman, coach. I mean, and he just started laughing. He's like, you got to be kidding me. Like, these guys are all going to be back. And so I think when all that stuff happened, I think Ferentz was like, why did we schedule these guys? And then, credit to NDSU. They had a really good game plan. They made Iowa play left-handed defensively. They took their best player out of the game just by the way they run their stuff. And so, it was kind of a perfect storm sometimes, and that's what it takes to win on the road. In that type of atmosphere, especially.
Well, like me and Gene.
Well, and you look at the team the guys that Iowa had on that team. It was George Kittle, one of the best tight ends in the NFL. Desmond King also played in that game. The cornerbacks are all playing in the NFL as well. They were younger, but they were all playing. C.J. Beathard is, I believe, still in the NFL. It was
he's the backup.
It wasn't a slouch. They were coming off they were a. Sorry to open some wounds, Grant, but they were about an LJ Scott touchdown away from playing in the playoff.
I still hate LJ Scott.
Well, there was a big nose tackle,
Jaleel
tackle
Johnson.
too.
Oh yeah.
But, yeah, third round.
Josie Jewell was a junior linebacker.
That's right. Forgot about him too.
Also, Bo Bauer, who got a tryout for the Denver Broncos, and then young man played for Arizona last year, played his first 4 years in Kansas City. Ben Neiman.
Yeah,
so that was, it was one of the better linebacking cores Iowa has had in these last 5 years, which they always produce.
That was a good
year. But
that was a good team.
Three guys in the NFL.
Well,
I was going to say, it's kind of funny when Iowa scheduled that game. They scheduled these 4 or 5 years out. Maybe NDSU only had one national championship. You can't think they're going to go on an unprecedented run where they win 4 in a row. And at that year, it's kind of funny. Iowa, they probably played 9 or 10 Big Ten games because North Dakota State was a Big Ten team that year.
Right.
Well, like
That's
Iowa
right.
punted it with the 5 minutes left, and NDSU gets it. Me and Gene just look at each other on the sideline like, oh shit, we're actually going to lose this game. Like, you just knew it at that time. NDSU doesn't mess it up. Easton just goes right down the field, sets them up.
Well, and then how many people thought the game was over when they went for 2 and didn't get it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was the other part of the game. We're like, oh, we lost it. And I didn't get the sense people around were too worried, like, we'll just get a stop and get the ball back. You know what I mean? Like,
that's exactly
you don't do that. You don't do that at Iowa.
That's what I was saying, though. Because I remember talking with Grant and Ethan about this after that game. Is going for 2 was the best thing NDSU could have done, and missing it was probably the best thing they could have done, because if they get it, Iowa would have went out. They would have been more aggressive. They would have tried throwing the ball around, and instead, they tried to just run the clock out and get a first down to move the sticks, run the clock out, and then NDSU made a stop, and then all of a sudden, like Ethan said, looks at Gene. Do you think Gary Barta was smiling a little bit, being the fellow or former NDSU alum as well?
I don't think so.
Not a chance.
No.
Not a chance. Not at all.
Okay.
Because he's
Gary,
the AP who scheduled this game and lost this game.
He was walking up and down the sideline the whole fourth quarter, trying to hype these guys up, helping
and
out.
hired and extended the football coach numerous times too. I mean, it's when you're the one in charge of that, those are the make or break decisions, man, that you either keep your job or you don't. And that's one of those moments for Gary. That I think was one of his first kind of bullets, so to speak, to the vest.
Yeah. I want to say when it was scheduled, I want to say it was it was in between the year NDSU's 3-9 year and then the year in between the playoffs, or the year after they made the playoffs and their first national title. Cause I kind of remember them scheduling it. So to Grant's point, it was NDSU was kind of, Craig Bowl was on the hot seat. There were a lot of questions in Fargo. There were a lot of off-field issues. It was NDSU. There was some tough times before they have been on this run. But
Dylan,
I know you got your start in Bismarck.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I got to know who you were, is watching you being on the state tournament games and then calling the NDSU games, and then I got to interview you when I was a sophomore in college.
I remember that.
But so do you have any memories of any interesting places that you've been at for games, calling it or going to, as far as going to shoot games for highlights in your time, your early years?
My early years, not really. I mean, we were so predominantly focused on local for pretty much everything. And especially in Bismarck, when I started out there, it was so heavy high school on everything. I did get a chance to call a University of Mary Carroll College, like NAIA football game, and I'd never really done one before. And that was my first experience doing it, and I really loved it. And that's when I was like, man, this is what I want to do if I can ever get to that point. And that was kind of a challenge. You know how it's not easy to kind of wiggle your way into these roles. You need to get some breaks and kind of get lucky a little bit. And I did eventually. But, the one thing to me that will always kind of stand out as I went from Bismarck to KVOI was when NDSU was going through the transition. I really enjoyed, I think, the 2008, 2009 NDSU men's team, because we had never experienced March Madness in this area before on a D1 level. We didn't even know what the experience felt like to have conference tournament basketball and a chance to play in the NCAA tournament. I mean, that was just, our biggest thing was D2, getting to the Elite Eight. And even then you're going to these weird places and you're playing schools you've never heard of, like Shippensburg and what, you know what I mean? Like it just it didn't really resonate with you. But when you started playing in conference tournaments and you're playing on ESPN on a Tuesday night, and if you win, you're going to the NCAA tournament, that was like a massive deal. And that was a fun team with Woodside and Winkleman and all those guys. That was a special year. And then getting a chance to cover that and experience that firsthand, and then getting a chance to go to the Metrodome and watch them play Kansas in a competitive game. And I'm standing, I'm sitting courtside. I mean, I've never been to cover one of these things before. And I'm looking for my seat, and here I am, and I sit down. I'm right in front. I'm in the front row, and literally from me to across 6 feet is where the court is, and I'm sitting watching an NCAA tournament. I mean, that was a surreal feeling. I mean, I'd never had anything like that. I'm like, this is crazy. Like, I'm covering an NCAA tournament. That was where it started to feel really real to me. And then I went and did the interviews and did my stuff, and then I came back to continue working, and Michigan State is playing Dayton. And I'm like, oh my God, Michigan State's playing Dayton. And I still have a great seat for that game. So it was kind of surreal just to kind of be a part of that for the first time. That's where I think the whole D1 thing felt D1 to me. That's where it really started to resonate that this was a really big deal and that this move was a significant one, for the university.
Did you happen to
and that was their first year?
Did you happen to make super weird eye contact with Tom Izzo? Because that happened to me at Iowa, and it's still to this day the most terrifying thing in my life.
I don't remember. I don't even remember. No, I don't remember. And I was kind of half working to finish my report to send it back, to get it back for the 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock, whatever it was that night. So I was I would take breaks just to watch the game, but it's amazing to watch those guys coach. I'm sure you guys understand and appreciate that.
Crazy.
It's a totally different level how they go about their business and what they can get away with on the sidelines compared to some others. I mean, it's intense.
Well, and even real quick, guys, kind of fun fact or fun story. I remember that NDSU tournament game. I think I was a freshman in high school, and my parents let me skip or be home sick that day to watch the March Madness. And I remember watching that NDSU Kansas game, just thinking, this is pretty cool. You got this blue blood in Kansas. And the school in North Dakota at the time, I just, in Mankato, like, oh, school from North Dakota, they're playing Kansas, and they're giving them a battle. I was like, this is really cool, and that's what makes March Madness so special.
And Bill Self, I'll never forget it. Woodside was just going off, right? They could not stop him. I think he had 37 in that game, and just using the high pick and roll, could get to the 10 at will. And Self, one time, you could hear him shout it. He went back after he got to the basket again, and he shouted at his assistants, how do we effing stop that guy? And he just shouted it, and everybody heard it. We're like, oh my God, you hear that? So it was those types of moments where you're just like, wow, that was really fun.
Did you get to call the Oklahoma game then?
No, that was an NCAA tournament game.
Okay, I didn't know if they did like the home radio or anything like that.
No, and I wasn't doing any radio. Well, I did a few radio games sporadically throughout that time, but I was pretty much relegated to TV.
Got it. That's what I thought, but
yeah,
that was fun.
That would have been awesome, though, man.
Was that the first tournament win?
Yep.
It had to have been.
Yep.
That was
it was
my favorite NDSU memory from going to school there. Like that was just took the country by storm. Like
I agree. And honestly, guys, like I know there's been a lot of big football wins, and I get it. I will still hold that one as the biggest win in NDSU school history of any sport.
100%.
You beat Oklahoma in the NCAA tournament.
And beat them.
Is
like,
massive.
You
beat them.
Yeah.
That was massive. I mean, I will always say that's the biggest win in NDSU history in any sport. And I know a footballer would be like, you're nuts. Like they've beaten Iowa and Kansas State and they won national championships. It's the NCAA tournament, man. It's not the same. It's on a different level, in my opinion. When you're looking at a national picture and a national lens.
And a team that 2 years later went to the pretty much intact, went to the Final Four.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And but to go back to your time at North Dakota, calling the state football, state basketball, state hockey as well. Do you have any memories that stick out in your mind from those games that called? Because you've had some memorable ones. I believe you were on the call for a couple of game winners as well.
Yeah. And here's what I like that's changed about the state tournaments is they seed the teams now. So they see them, so you don't have the best team playing the other best team in the first round. We ran into that a lot. Unfortunately, where you remember the one year, and you'd have to go back. This is many years ago, but when New Rockford played Linton, and they were 1-2, and it was Kyle Carr and it was Belquist. You had all these kids, and they were 1-2, all year, and neither one had lost, and they played in the first round, and it was almost like a letdown because whoever won that was going to win the whole thing, and they did. So I was really fortunate to be around for a lot of those games, and there's nothing like the small town Class B feel of the Class B tournament. Those will always stand out to me over anything, just because that was the crown jewel of North Dakota. And I understand there's a time to change. I think the 3-class system probably makes sense now more than it ever has, just because of the disparity in some of the Class B schools is as high as it's ever been to have a third class. But I will miss the special feeling of what the Class B was for so many years. And I don't know if anything necessarily stands out. Carrington with Devin Barton one year played against Berthold, I think, or I believe that, or was it?
Yeah, it was the Yale brothers. Yep.
The Yale brothers.
That was 2010.
That was a great game, and that was a great tournament from start to finish. Everything was super competitive. That was a really fun one. I remember that one a lot because I just remember that being just super competitive from start to finish. It was a lot of fun. Other than that, they all kind of blur together. I would have to go back and think about it. I mean, it's been so long. It's been, 13, 14, 15, 16 years since I was a part of those crews. So I'd almost have to go back. I mean, a lot of those kids I covered are now married and have multiple kids of their own. So it's just very weird for even think back to those days a little bit.
Yeah. Well, because I'm trying to think. I think that year that you're thinking of the Kyle Carr New Rockford game is, I want to say it was 2005 up in Minot.
Yep.
When New Rockford hit that buzzer beater against Botno in double overtime.
Right.
I remember that game because Botno beat Trinity in the semis, and then the next year Trinity won on a buzzer beater. It was back-to-back years they had buzzer beaters, but I was glad. My senior year was actually the last year they didn't do the seedings. It was paired up by regions.
Yep.
And because there's a few other times, because I remember one of the years it was Watford, Linton. I think it was the year Linton was undefeated, and they would do a 5-5 rotation, 5 in, 5 out. That was probably a state championship game even the first year Trinity finally got over the hump in 2004. It was New Rockford versus Trinity in the first round.
It sure was. And that's when Grinsteiner, Grinsteiner and some of these really good coaches, Dave Nelson at Mayport, they would just take the air out of the ball and win games 35-33. And they preached defense and toughness and rebounding. And it was really a strategic game of how the game was being played. If you wanted to play a quick tempo against those teams, you could not control tempo and you'd get beat. They were just so well coached. Those coaches were so good. I mean, they were really good at what they did and taking their time and everything. I knew it drove some fans nuts, and then eventually now we got the shot clock. We don't have that anymore, but that made it interesting. When you got into the fourth quarter, is how many possessions do we have left and who's going to finally take the big shot? Because you really didn't know. But I have a lot of respect for all of those coaches over these years too, in the Class B ranks, especially because they built programs and they didn't always have the best athletes, but they always had really good teams.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned those two. They played in the Classic in 06 when Landon Smith hit the buzzer beater. And then similarly a state championship, I want to say it was in 2002 when they played in the first round.
Yep. And
Mayport came out on top. But got a few more questions before we wrap up here. So I have one that's always interesting. I've had a few coaches on here, and the guys on this podcast, we enjoy food a lot. So I'm curious now, which place that you've been to has the best food space and food spread in their hospitality room?
I would say it is a tie between Mayport and Mayville and Lisbon.
Really?
Yeah. Lisbon was special. I mean, they pulled out all the stops. Like they brought all the grandmas and everybody brought their special dishes out, and they had Subway there, and they had a whole spread. I mean, you could eat till you were sick. And that, for those of us that were starving sportscasters at that time, I mean, we really enjoyed our free food, man. I mean, you take advantage of it. But I mean, from the high school ranks, that one will always special to me. But Linton, interestingly enough, after they won their football championship, I don't know what year that was, 04-ish, somewhere around there, 03, 04.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, it was somewhere around there. They have an impressive potluck situation there, man. I mean, it filled it. Like I went to cover the celebration, and the potluck food filled up the entire room. I mean, there was literally 200 different things you could go get. I mean, it was incredible. I'd never seen. No. I mean, and they're like, oh, have some of this or have some of that. I mean, it's impressive. As a matter of fact, Kyle Carr will still text me to this day when they have a potluck over at their community area. He'll take a picture and say, you're missing out. To this day, because he knows how much I love the potlucks in Linton and how much I appreciated that. When I would go there, always welcome. Oh man, it was awesome. It was really, really, that was the best experience ever. And I was hoping to make it out for Dan Carr's retirement party a couple of weeks ago, and I couldn't. I had something that I just couldn't get away out of town to go out there for, but I did record a message and send it out there. But I know they had a huge potluck, and I know they did. That would have been an awesome experience to be there for that too. But there's nothing like the Class B towns, man, just because it's so hometown feel. It's not the fancy dishes and some of the fancy meals that you maybe get covering an NCAA tournament, where it's good food, it's fancy, it's catered very fancy, and that's just very much your homegrown hometown type of meal, which I appreciated.
Okay, yeah, because I know you've been to some pretty big stadiums. You've been to Kinnick, you've been to Kansas State, you've been to Nebraska. I thought those were going to be the ones that you were going to mention, but you can never go wrong with some small town. They want to make the people that make it. They want to make sure you never ever get skinny.
No, I mean, and the food is so good. I mean, you can tell they were working on it all day. I mean, some of this hash brown casserole and some of the meatball flavors and all this stuff. I'm like, it was just incredible. I mean, it was so good, and you could just pile it on there. It was, and honestly, yeah, you go to some of these places like the Fargo Dome buffet is good, and some of these other places they have good media buffets for you, but then you go to other places like Northern Iowa where they just order in 10 pizzas and you better get there quickly because it's all going to be gone, because it's a quick grab. I mean, you should see it. It's just like everybody coming in and just swooping in to get pizza before it's gone. And then some places don't have anything. So you never go in expecting, I guess, any of that stuff. Even when I covered the Vikings, guys, you're shooting the game on the sidelines like I was, and it was really fun to do that. You literally go into the tunnel, you grab like a ham sandwich and a bag of chips and you eat it, and that's what you get because that's all you have time to eat, and that's what they have sitting there for you. So usually when you're hungry, if you're hungry enough, you'll eat whatever they give you.
I can tell, Grant, you're sweating just by listening to the homemade food.
Thinking about, the homemade food, and it's just, it's small town USA, and like Brian said, you put all day into this meal. It's like it comes in like that blue stainless steel dish, and you just know that meal is going to slap. It's just because it's something about that dish. It's like when you go to the barbecue and Dad's got his socks up to his knees and the white New Balances on. He's clicking the tongs 3 times. We're ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is our last question. We always end it. It's called with a segment called Curveball of the Week, and it's usually something non-sports related, different type of questions coming. And this is somewhat sports related, but you're a golfer, correct?
Well, I don't know if I'd call what I do golf.
That's
I hit the
all.
ball.
It's okay.
That's all of us. Yeah. That's all of us. But this is my question is we're all we're in a foursome. We're at the turn. It's right around lunchtime. What is the go-to meal at the turn for when you're golfing?
Ooh. A barbecue beef brisket sandwich.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh wow! I want to know where you're golfing at. It goes that fancy.
Some places down in the Twin Cities have them.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah.
I know
there's some
Emerald
places
Greens
that
just
sell them.
outside of Hastings here, guys. Emerald Greens has a good barbecue brisket sandwich.
Yeah. There's quite a few of them down there. It's kind of a jam. Yeah. So that's a place that
Are you getting any sides? Are you getting a drink or something salty, something sweet, or just going with the brisket sandwich?
Brisket sandwich, and then usually I'll get something like a bag of peanuts. I don't know why.
Oh, okay.
Like, peanuts they taste really good. It tastes good if you're having a couple of other beverages. You know what I mean? It's just kind of nice to have a handful of peanuts.
Yeah.
That's like my jam.
A little salty. Help get some of that salt back up from when you're sweating.
It's
Yeah.
I'm a big honey roasted peanuts fan, so I'll always have a couple of handfuls of those.
Mm-hmm.
Those are that's what I usually do. And sometimes I'm just not very hungry. You know, if it's hot, you're just like, ugh.
Yeah.
And then you're drinking and you kind of feel, ooh, you feel even worse. So, it's some of those days I'm just like, I don't even want to eat. But, one of my jobs, one food I don't ever touch anywhere, I tell people this, is in high school, my summer job is I was only 15, and it was hard to find work when you were 15. And when I was at my mom and stepdad's place, I found a place, Chaska Bakery in Chaska, Minnesota. I got hired there to wash dishes my first year. And then every consequent summer, I went back for 4 or 5 years after that. And I got there at 3:30 in the morning. I made the donut dough. I fried the donuts. I glazed them. I decorated them. I did all that stuff. And then I would make deliveries. To this day, guys, I still don't eat donuts. I don't touch donuts.
Just got scarred.
I just, when you see how they're made and you see guys, it just brings me back. I see a donut, like they'll bring in Sandy's Donuts, who are great, right? And I know everybody loves them. They do a great job. But I look at them and I can't touch them. I think if you make like ice cream, it's probably the same way. You probably don't eat ice cream. I just think once you see it and you've been around it and you see the grease and all that stuff, you're just like, I'm never touching that again. And I haven't. So that's one food.
All right. What you two? Yeah. All right, Grant, Ethan, let's hear your guys's.
Probably a little weird, but whatever. A lot of places have the roasters of like the hot dogs in them. The bottom of the very bottom one, it's burnt to hell, but it's the best one every time.
No water in the roaster?
No water in the roaster. No,
okay.
No, we're going super hard.
Okay.
Just bareback in that hot dog.
Literally.
I just saw a TikTok of these guys that they don't buy any food on the course. I saw a guy, he filled it with water, filled like a hydro flask with water. It had to have been boiling and put hot dogs in it. And then mid round, that's what they were eating.
That sounds terrible.
Like almost like his version of Rafi's pocket dog.
Yeah, that's what it sounds
That's
like.
exactly what it is.
Oh, that's terrible.
And that's. I mean, that's not good.
No.
I don't know.
Oh wow, that's a good one.
We-
Now, Ethan, are you putting any condiments or anything on the hot dog, or just raw dog in it?
Just raw dogging. If there's pickles, yes, but otherwise raw dogging.
which is the way to go in life.
Okay.
But I'm like kind of like Brian. I'm maybe not feeling the food, but if I am going to get something, again, just keeping it simple, we're going to go with a cheeseburger, a little ketchup, a little mustard, and then a bag of Doritos on the side.
Yeah, that goes. That plays.
I gotta go with the Snickers too. Always get a Snickers.
Yeah, a little sugar, a little candy is actually
little
probably
salt
good for you. Yeah.
But yeah, nothing crazy for me, Dylan. Cheeseburger, ketchup, mustard, bag of nacho cheese, Doritos on the side. Let's go.
Okay. Yeah. You can't go wrong there. Now, for me, I would probably, they have them in Dickinson. They have like thinly sliced summer sausage sandwiches.
Ooh.
With, it was, and you got lettuce, pickles, tomatoes. I know Ethan's not a big tomato guy, but.
Oh, no, God, no. Ugh.
We all have our flaws.
That with some, mayo or Miracle Whip, whichever one they have. I'm not too picky, and some mustard, and then a thing of barbecue chips. And in Dickinson, they have really good scotcheroos, which goes back to the homemade discussion. A little bit expensive, but totally worth it. Or if they don't have that, like Ethan, you can't go wrong with a Snickers.
Man, yeah.
Like the only time I ever buy Snickers. I don't know why.
Yeah.
That goes back to the discussion of things that hit difference. A Snickers on a golf course is one of those. They just taste just a little bit better.
True statement.
Yeah, that's true, man. Candy just does in general.
You're not you when you're hungry, so you need a Snickers on the golf course. It's because you're not you on the golf course.
Yeah, that is true. In theory, then that would help you play better. It usually doesn't for me.
No,
but
God, no. Not a chance.
But yeah, well, Brian, appreciate you coming on. This was a lot of fun. We will have to do this again at some point down the road. So I know you're out at the lake right now. So which lake are you at?
Lake Lida, and just outside of Pelican Rapids, Minnesota. Yeah, that's where we'll be here. Be here through the 4th. I don't know if you guys will be able to see it. I closed the curtain. Here, I can lift it up. Kind of see the lake back there.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see.
It doesn't look terrible.
No, it's pretty decent, fellas. It's pretty decent.
Now, are you a fisher, or are you more into water sports? I think you seem more like a very water, like a ski slalom guy.
No, I've never been on water skis in my life. No, I like to get out in the water and have fun, but we do kayak a lot as a family. That's kind of our big family activity is kayaking. That's really fun. It's a nice calm lake. It's shallow. But then also really enjoy just getting out on it, and enjoying the sunshine, sitting outside and looking at the water. It's very peaceful.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again, Brian. We will enjoy your time at the lake, and we will talk to you next time.
Hey, appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll see you later, Brian.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you, guys.